Chapter 16. Dances with Shadows. My world and I are going for a walk. The origin of intention. A characteristic feature of the relationship people have with the outside world is that anything new is eventually treated as something mundane. Like clouds in the sky, reality constantly changes in appearance, but the rate of change is too slow for us to perceive. The movement of material realization through the alternative space is like the movement involved in a cloud formation. We can only perceive it when it is captured on film and the footage is sped up. Even the freshness of change that brightens life in short bursts dulls just as quickly. The unusual becomes the ordinary, and the delight of the feast dissolves into the everyday routine. Life becomes boring. Just as a rhetorical question I would like to ask, what is boredom? It is difficult to give a comprehensive and intelligible definition of boredom. It would be easier to describe how to fight boredom. In an attempt to survive the monotony of everyday life, the heart and mind make up all kinds of toys and games to help us experience something new and unusual. A toy is a good remedy for boredom, and a game is an even better one. Besides skating, games like hide and seek, catch, etc. are great fun and extremely popular. As a person gets older, they think up more sophisticated means of amusing themselves, from sports to contests to virtual reality. Many professions are in essence nothing other than a game. Why do I say many? Try and name a profession that could not be perceived as a game. Whatever a person does, in reality, they are just playing. In their superiority, grown-ups call what children do a game, but adults are also playing. It is just that they self-importantly refer to their play as work. Both take a very responsible attitude towards their activities. Ask a child what they are doing, and they will answer with you in great seriousness, even earnestness. I am playing. Try distracting an adult from their work, and they will respond with indignation. I'm doing something important. So the game is a serious matter. What does a child do when they are not occupied with a game? As a rule, they just muck about. So what about the grown-ups? They slob out. That is just what the adults call it. But doing nothing soon becomes boring, and then you want to play a new game. So why do we need games if only to relieve the boredom of life? Let us put the question differently. What causes boredom? Insufficient stimulus, perhaps? This question is not as trivial as it might seem. The basis of our passion for games and play is as ancient as the world we live in. What is the fundamental need of living beings? Survival and the instinct for self-preservation? This is the accepted stereotype, although it is not the correct answer. Could it be the desire to reproduce? Again, this is not the right answer. So what is it then? The primary need is to be able to independently manage our own lives. This is the fundamental principle underlying the behavior of all living beings. Everything else, including survival and reproductive instincts, are a consequence of this main principle. In other words, the goal and purpose of all living beings is to control their reality. However, it is impossible to control reality if the outside world exists independently of you and behaves in a totally uncontrollable or even hostile manner. There will always be others who want to steal your food, drive you out of a cozy corner, or even devour you as their next meal. It is hard and even scary when you are not choosing how to live your life and you feel that life is just happening to you instead, and there is nothing you can do about it. This gives rise to the insistent and sometimes unconscious desire to control the world around you. This conclusion will come as a surprise to many. It has always been obvious that the survival instinct was primary, and now you are telling us that it is in fact just a consequence of something more fundamental? It only seems strange at first. When you think about it, whatever activity a living creature is engaged in, including survival and reproduction, everything comes down to the attempt to bring the reality of the world under control. This is the key motive and primary origin of all intention underlying the activities of living beings. Inactivity is the absence of control. Consequently, boredom as such does not exist. What does exist is a consistent and insatiable thirst to control one's reality, to somehow subject it to your own will. In this sense, a game is a way of modeling controllable reality. Some kinds of birds, for example, love to play with pine cones. The pine cone is a particle of an independent, uncontrollable reality. As soon as the bird makes the pine cone a piece of its game, that particle, and to some degree reality itself, becomes controllable. Skating or sliding is also a kind of control. Reality carries me, but in the way I want it to. To some extent, any other type of game follows the same rule. Be what I want you to be. The game script is more or less predetermined, which makes the situation fairly predictable. There are, of course, other games in which it is more difficult to lead, but all games can basically be reduced to one and the same thing: to control what is happening with your will. To the observer, any kind of visible spectacle represents a game which models the control of reality. Music, books, films, and shows are all swings for the heart and mind. The exhausting stream of tense thoughts ceases and is transformed into a flight on the wings of an elegant melody or captivating story. Whatever might happen to the main characters in a film that we are watching is a tamed, trained version of reality, and so the observer can relax and enjoy the show. Games in which we play with reality never cease, even when we are sleeping. The heart and mind take pleasure in the world of dreaming, where reality is subtly shaped to the light puff of intention. Finally, games of the imagination are another acceptable method of shaping reality. A person will even make up a reality that does not exist yet, just to play at being at control. Science fiction is unusual. It remains unusual for as long as it is unreal and far removed from our lives. Reality is commonplace because of its proximity, and yet it retains a quality of being inaccessible because it is hard to influence. Generally speaking, none of these games are made up in the effort against boredom. Everyday reality is not boring. It is mundane because it is uncontrollable. It is difficult to make everyday reality conform to the rule, be as I want you to be. Hence, as human beings, we strive to hide from the nature of reality in a game where everything is simple and predictable. Nonetheless, there is nowhere to hide from the inevitability of reality. The life of any individual is conditioned by their circumstances and position in society. Mostly, reality develops irrespective of personal will. To every I want, there seems to be a you cannot. To every give me, you will hear you are not getting it. So what is to be done with these conditions? As a rule, people are fairly unambiguous in their behavior. In trying to get what they want, they try to influence their environment in a linear, direct way according to the principle of give it to me. Direct influence based on immediate contact is one form of control, but it is not the only form and is by far the most effective. We will go about things in a different way. We will hide our hands behind our back and make the world meet our desires halfway. Everything that comes next will relate to how we do this. Transurfing is a technique for controlling reality without direct impact, only not for fun as in a game, but for real. The law of bad luck. In order to learn how to control reality, you must at the very least understand how reality is created. Every individual is the direct creator of the layer of their own world, but the majority of people do not understand how this process works. People try to make everything the way they want it to be, and they apply this straightforward principle to the outside world. I will go in the direction I turn. It will cave in where I press it. But for some reason, the world does not want to obey, and when you turn one way, you find yourself going in the opposite direction. It makes you wonder, if reality behaves so strangely, perhaps our attempts to shape it require a different approach. Maybe reality does not work according to the laws we thought. But people do not want to stop and look around and ask themselves these questions. Instead, they stubbornly insist on having things their own way. As a result of this stubborn kind of creativity, the person's individual layer is created in which nothing is the way they want it to be. Reality seems strange, capricious, and hard-line. Sometimes you get the feeling that the world is doing it on purpose, despite you. It is as if problems and unwanted events are drawn to you by some inexplicable force. Our fears are realized and our worst expectations justified. We are relentlessly pursued by the things we are averse to and wish to avoid. So why is this? In the beginner's transurfing course, we already talked about why you often get what you don't want, particularly if the aversion is intense. When you hate or fear something with all your heart, outer intention will deliver it to you in abundance. Thought energy that is born from unity of heart and mind embodies potential in reality. In other words, the sector of the alternative space that corresponds to the qualities of your thought energy will be streamed into physical reality if the feelings of the heart are one with the thoughts of the mind. However, this is not the only reason that our worst expectations are realized. Life should be free of problems. That is the norm. If you do not disturb the balance and go with the alternatives flow, everything should unfold very smoothly. Nature does not like wasting energy and has no intention of spending it on plotting against us. Unwanted circumstances and events occur as a result of the distortion that excess potential creates in the surrounding energy field, while dependent relationships exacerbate the situation even further. Excess potential appears when excessive meaning is attributed to a particular quality. Dependent relationships are created when people begin to compare and contrast themselves with others and place conditions upon a relationship such as, if you are going to be like that, then I am going to be like this. The excess potential that is created when a distorted evaluation is made will have no grievous effects while it stands relative only to itself. However, as soon as an inflated evaluation of a given object is placed in comparative relationship with another, polarization occurs, which generates the winds of balanced forces. Balanced forces strive to eliminate the polarization that has occurred, and for the most part, their action is aimed against the individual who created the polarization in the first place. The following are examples of non-relative potentials. I love you. I love myself. I hate you. I do not like myself. I'm a good person. You are a bad person. These evaluations are self-contained because they are not based on comparison or contradistinction. The following, however, are examples of potentials based on dependent relationships. I love you on the condition that you love me. I love myself because I am greater than the rest of you. You are a bad person because I am a better person than you. I am a good person because you are a bad person. I do not like myself because I am less attractive than others. I am repulsed by you because you are not the same as me. There is a huge difference between the first and second group of evaluations. Evaluations based on the principle of comparison generate polarization. Balanced forces eliminate the heterogeneity by bringing the opposite values together just as the opposite poles of two magnets are drawn towards each other. This is why problems, as if deliberately, push their way into our lives. For example, married couples are often made up of two personalities that seem totally incompatible, as if they were a punishment the other must bear. In various types of groups, there will only be at least one person who will make your life difficult. Murphy's, or as we call it, Sod's Law, is of the same nature, and putting up with nasty neighbors seems to be an essential condition of any form of close habitation. The example of nuisance neighbors is a perfect illustration of the polarization effect. This issue, despite its seemingly mundane nature, is directly related to the field of metaphysics. The problem is that some people prevent others from getting on with their lives. But why? Because wherever you are, there will always be bad old women and old women who will not leave other good people in peace. So, should we conclude that people really can be discriminated into two groups? And yet, if you were to carry out a survey asking people which group they thought they belonged to, only a small handful would acknowledge themselves as belonging to the bad group. On the whole, your neighbors are just like you. The tendency to discriminate is created by the wind of balanced forces that blows in the direction of your aversion. The direction the wind takes is determined by the same old principle, Sod's Law. You will experience anything you do not like. Some may protest. It has nothing to do with balanced forces. Some people just have no conscience. There is no point in philosophizing about it. I will prove to you now that there is more to these situations than convoluted speculation. Let us suppose that your neighbors are annoying you. Do you annoy them too? Probably not, but why? Quote, because they are like this and we are like that, and basically, we are like we are and they are bad, you will say. And yet there are no good and bad people. Any judgment is relative because it is generated by comparison and contradistinction. So why is it then that you do not annoy your neighbors? My answer may surprise you. The reason you do not annoy your neighbors is because they could not care less about you. Exactly, you will say, because they are bad people and have no shame. With this attitude to your neighbors, you switch on polarization, like an electromagnet which will draw to you ever more problems related to your neighbors. To them, it will all be water off a duck's back because you are of no interest to them whatsoever. It does not occur to them to look at you and make comparative discriminations, i.e., enter into a dependent relationship with you. It is in this sense that they could not care less about you. They do not attach any importance to you or allow you to enter the layer of their world, and as a result, they have no suffering they connect with you. Your neighbors experience no polarization in relationship to you while they are busy with their own lives and pay you no attention. And yet, if they were to attach importance to your neighborly existence and begin comparing themselves to you, it would be instantly apparent that you are not like they are. If this were to trouble them or touch a raw nerve in any way, then you would undoubtedly start annoying them, and you would cease to be a good neighbor and be transformed into a bad neighbor. The situation will develop even more unexpectedly. You will begin to create the kind of problems for your neighbors that you would never have dreamed could possibly trouble anyone. You will begin to annoy your neighbors without being aware that you are doing so, just as they now have no awareness of the fact that they are annoying you. When sharing a house, for example, noise pollution is problem number one. The more you dislike the noise, the more intensely it will pursue you, despite the fact that peace and quiet is the ideal condition for cohabitating, not only for you, but for your neighbors also. Less energy is expended that way. And any disturbance of the peace and quiet is always an anomaly and does not arise without a reason. So where does the energy originate? The noise your neighbors or flatmates make throws you off balance, and you begin to quietly, or not so quietly, hate them for it. Your irritation serves as the source of the energy in the situation. A dependent relationship is created, which in turn generates polarization. Intense and aggressive feelings like, I hate these noisy neighbors, create a powerful magnet that draws ever new forms of irritating provocation to you. New neighbors will move in next door who have a tendency for a noisy lifestyle, and your old neighbors or flatmates will buy new sound equipment, as if deliberately to taunt you. You should also be aware that your neighbors' neighbors also contribute to the situation, and if the common feeling in response to the noisy neighbors coincides, the effect will be magnified. Of course, having nice neighbors depends on more than noise levels. It all depends on what kind of things you feel an aversion to. They might overwhelm you with their rubbish, suffocate you with unpleasant smells, cover the walls in the entrance hall with graffiti, etc. An aversion to neighbors as a species may attract even more tangible consequences, such as a flood or even a fire. In any other situation, this kind of law of bad luck works in the same way. An object or characteristic that is attributed particular meaning attracts objects with the opposite qualities. Meaning, as we know, is intensified via comparison and contradistinction. Where there is one magnetic pole, the other will not be far away. Polarization creates a magnet for problems and attracts everything that you feel an aversion to. Everything you find irritating will follow you. Everything that is highly undesirable happens. There is no mysticism in this. It is quite natural. Polarization distorts the lay of the energy field and gives rise to whirlwinds of balanced forces. As a result of the reflection of reality is warped like a reflection given by a curved mirror. Few people will understand that any deformity represents a consequence of balance being disturbed, and so they try to battle with the outside world rather than trying to eliminate the polarization effect. All you have to do is follow the main rule of transurfing. Be yourself and let others be themselves. You have to loosen your grip and give the world free rein. The more you insist in your own desires and rights, the more powerfully the magnet attracts the opposite. Figuratively speaking, it is as if you have grabbed the world by the throat, and it is resisting, fighting to get free. It is futile to try and pressure a situation or insist on something. That just makes things worse. Instead, consciously change your relationship to the situation in accordance with the transurfing rule. For example, try at least for a while to forget about your neighbors. Stop judging them and pretend they simply do not exist. Say to yourself, to hell with them. Rid the layer of your world of your neighbors. As soon as you are able to pull off the suction pad of your relationship, your neighbor's polarization will disappear and they will gradually cease to bother you. And if you manage to completely break the dependent relationship, you might make room for something incomprehensible to happen. Your toxic neighbors may just end up becoming your best friends. Everything happens despite you. Is it strange, do you not think, that Sod's law should exist at all? Why should the world be so cruel? Or perhaps it is not, and Sod's law is just speculation and prejudice. And yet there is no getting away from it. Sod's law as a tendency definitely exists. Fortunately, the transurfing model not only reveals the reason for this, it can also explain how to avoid getting caught out by this frustrating phenomenon. The transurfing rule works without fail, freeing anyone who follows it from all sorts of problems they otherwise would have been unable to explain. All you have to do is let go the grip of control. Stop grabbing the world by the throat, and life will instantly become welcoming and pliable. If you do not let go, you will end up walking around like a magnet drawing the opposite to you. And it does not just stop at Sod's law. The collision that occurs when opposites meet causes things to escalate even further. The well-known law of the unity and conflict of opposites, the essence of which is apparent in its name, has become accepted textbook knowledge. The Volga River empties into the Caspian Sea, and the Mississippi into the Gulf of Mexico, but it is not quite as simple as that. Let us start by asking ourselves why this law exists at all. We have already explained why the unity of opposites is omnipresent. Balanced forces bring opposites into contact with one another to restore the state of balance. This does not explain, however, why opposing forces should be in a constant state of conflict. You would think the opposite would be true. Two opposites collide, neutralize each other, and calm down. But no, the opposite forces will continue to anger each other to the point where they end up fighting. If you do not pull them apart, they will go on scrapping forever. You do not have to look too far afield to find examples. You will agree that the world gets on your nerves from time to time. Of course, it gets on everyone's nerves in different ways and to differing degrees, but the essence remains the same. When something does manage to throw you off balance, it always seems to happen as if to spite you. This is what happens. When you are worried or anxious about something, your nerves are strained even if just a little. Then, as if in consequence, a jester appears and starts jumping and leaping about enough to play on your nerves even more. It starts to irritate you, and then the jester jumps even faster. There are many things that play on your nerves, making us increasingly irritated. When you are in a hurry and afraid of being late, the jester claps his hands in glee and shouts, "Okay, let's go!" From this moment onwards, everything seems to work against you. People block your way or ceremoniously parade themselves, making it impossible for you to pass. You need to go through a certain door, but in front of you there is a whole queue of the laziest people in the world who can barely place one foot in front of the other. It is the same with traffic. It is as if all the other drivers have secretly conspired against you. Of course, some things can be put down to perception. When you are in a hurry, it appears as if the rest of the world is going really slowly, but there are other more obvious signs. The lift or your car breaks down, the bus is late, or there is a massive traffic jam. These things reek of a more ill-intentioned objectivity. I could give other examples. When you are stressed and anxious, other people around you do the very thing that irritates you, and they do it right at the moment when you want to be left alone. The children start going wild even though they had been behaving themselves previously. Someone sitting next to you will start slurping and swallowing loudly. All kinds of people will get under your feet and pester you with their problems. Everywhere things will get in the way. If you're desperate to see someone, you will end up waiting for them for ages. And if you do not want to see anyone, someone will definitely turn up uninvited, and so on and so forth. External pressures mount all the more intensely in direct proportion to your irritation. The more tense you are, the more actively other people will annoy you. The interesting thing is that people are not deliberately trying to annoy you. It would not occur to them that their behavior might be annoying someone. There are many gray areas in the psychology of the subconscious. However strange it may seem, people are mostly driven by subconscious motives. But even more peculiar is that the driving force that creates these subconscious motives originates external to the human psyche. Despite being invisible, this force consists of real informational energetic entities, born of the thought energy of living beings. Pendulums. A lot has been said about pendulums in the first part of the Transurfing series. Pendulums are always present where there is potential for conflicting energies. It would be a mistake to think that these entities are capable of conspiring or of making conscious intention a physical reality. Like leeches, pendulums sense polarization as an irregularity in the energy field and try to feed on it. There is nothing particularly wrong with that. The nightmare is that pendulums not only gulp down conflict, they somehow make people behave in such a way that they give out even more of this type of energy. They will do anything to make sure the energy keeps abundantly flowing. Pendulums pull people with invisible strings, and people comply like puppets. It is not clear exactly how pendulums manage to influence people's motivations, but they are very good at it. Clear conscious awareness is off limits to pendulums, but they get along very well without it, as the subconscious is enough to satisfy their needs. Most people are asleep and waking to one degree or another. There are many things we do automatically when we are relaxed without being soberly aware. In this moment, I am awake, and I am clearly aware of what I am doing, why and wherefore I am doing it. A person's level of awareness is particularly low when they are at home or in a crowd. In the conditions of one's home, there is a minimal requirement for heightened self-control, and so people are relaxed to the point that their awareness is low to the point of dozing off. In a situation outside of the home setting, but nonetheless with a close circle of friends, our conscious awareness is more alert and concerned with self-control. In larger groups, a person's actions once again become quite spontaneous and at the same time in strong correlation with the overall impulses of the crowd. To clearly demonstrate how the pendulum works, we will take the simple example of a pedestrian who you follow on the street and then overtake. As soon as you take a step to the left, preparing to take the person in front of you, they take a spontaneous step in the same direction, blocking your way. So you try and overtake them to the right, but they inadvertently move in the same direction again. What makes the pedestrian change direction? They cannot see you because you are behind them, and why should they be at all concerned by the fact that you wish to walk past them? Perhaps the pedestrian somehow senses something approaching their back and instinctively does not want to let their competitor pass in front of them? This supposition ends itself as an explanation, and yet this is not the reason. In nature, competitiveness is always expressed in situations where the two opposing parties stand facing one another. It is the pendulum that makes the pedestrian shift to the side. People walk without thinking about how to place their feet so that they follow a perfectly straight line. In this sense, we are asleep, and so from time to time, the line created by our footsteps spontaneously deviates to the left or to the right. The motivation, that is, the choice of direction, lies in the subconscious, which in the given moment is not controllable and so is potentially accessible to pendulums. Then you turn up and attempt to overtake the person in front of you. Essentially, the situation is a conflict, albeit a minor one. With the objective of drawing on the conflict energy, the pendulum forces the pedestrian to take a small step to the side to block your way and fuel the situation with intensity. Having said that, the pendulum does not act deliberately as such because it is incapable of conscious intention. Balanced forces are equally as subconscious in their actions. I should emphasize that here we are talking about certain processes, the mechanism for which is not entirely clear, but certainly not the premeditated behavior of conscious beings. We are simply noting individual laws and phenomena connected with the nature of the world of informational energy. There is no point in discussing the specific kind of pendulum that comes into play in this situation, how it appears, how it manages to have this kind of effect, and what exactly is happening on an energetic level, as we can never give a comprehensive answer to these questions. We can, however, draw the following significant conclusion. When balanced forces bring opposites into collision, pendulums will do everything possible to inflame the energy of the emerging conflict. This is the law of the pendulum. All pendulum battles, be they domestic arguments or armed conflicts, take place in accordance with this law. In case of resistance, events will always develop towards an escalation of the conflict irrespective of any temporary or destructive reconciliations. When the law of the pendulum is at work, the rational mind has no power. This is why the actions of individuals as well as governments seem to make no sense at all. In conflict situations, the individual's motives are under the power of the pendulum. This is also why we sometimes look back on our actions as if they were a dream, wondering how we could have been devoid of common sense and reason, and what could have made us behave so strangely. The reason is, of course, that a person acts without awareness. Consequently, when one's consciousness is no longer subject to external influence, events are perceived from a clearer perspective. People who are in close relationships argue and separate, becoming convinced that their personalities are incompatible, and yet there must have been moments of happiness when everything was going wonderfully. But then one partner changes as if out of the blue and starts behaving coldly or with hostility. They are suddenly nothing like the person they were just a short time ago. No doubt this situation is familiar to you. In reality, it has nothing to do with the fact that one partner or the other has changed. One person behaves in a manner that is totally unacceptable to the other because they are pushed into it by a pendulum. Pendulums control the subconscious motives of people who oppose one another, and the control is aimed at increasing the energy of a conflict. People fail to realize that they are being pushed into a confrontation and are capable of acting illogically and inappropriately. This effect is particularly noticeable in crimes of inexplicable cruelty. It is only afterwards, when the criminal is in the dock, that they recall their actions in bewilderment. I do not know what came over me, and they are not lying. This is exactly what happens. The criminal is totally shocked and recalls their crime as if it were a terrible dream. The dream is particularly heavy as a person's attention has been caught in the pendulum's noose. In certain communities, such as, for example, the army, a gang or sect, an environment is created with its specific stereotypes of behavior and patterns of thinking. This numbs the mind, and the subconscious becomes totally open to the zombifying effect of pendulums. Then things happen that to the objective bystanders seem totally incomprehensible. Why do people kill others just like them with such ferocity simply because they worship a different god? What harm were they doing? People suffer in these wars, and dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions even lose their lives. Whatever happened to the survival instinct? One could just about understand the violent battle for wealth or territory, but how are we supposed to understand the battle for a belief? Peace is an idea that everyone believes in, but there is no end to war. The notion of one God is obvious, and likewise kindness, justice, and equality. The list goes on. We all understand these things, and yet common sense does not work, and evil prevails. So, where does evil come from? Pendulums are a universal source of evil. You only have to observe for a short while for it to become quite obvious. Whatever the circumstances in any confrontation, events always move in the direction of the increasing energy of conflict. If the fight dies down, then the reprieve is short-lived and bound to flare up again with renewed fury. Of course, there are many different types of pendulums, but all are destructive, albeit to varying degrees. Many are relatively harmless. The transurfing pendulum, for example, is necessary so that as many people as possible start to think about what is really happening. It is not about freeing oneself from pendulums altogether, for this is pretty impossible. The important thing is not to be a puppet on a string, to act with conscious awareness and to use these structures in your own interests. So how can you free yourself from their negative influence? Wake up and be aware of how pendulums are trying to manipulate now. Understanding what is happening is half the battle. The power of the pendulum's influence is inversely proportionate to awareness. They only have power over you while your consciousness is asleep in waking life. Above all, do not get involved in the pendulum's destructive battles unless it is necessary to you personally. When you find yourself in the crowd, leave the stage and stand in the auditorium. Look around and wake up. Ask yourself, why am I here? What am I doing here? And am I aware of what is happening? Waking up from sleeping and waking life must be articulated very precisely as above. In this moment, I am awake, and I am perfectly aware of what I am doing and why I am doing it specifically in this way. If you have this kind of awareness, then all will be well. If you do not, then even in the smallest, most insignificant conflict situation, you are still a puppet. This is hardest to do when something is annoying you. Usually the gesture will continue with its jumping all the time that your nerves are on edge. Normally this means that the pendulum has caught you in its noose. You can free yourself from the pendulum by falling into indifference, but this is not easy to do. For example, your neighbors are getting to you playing music you really hate. In this case, your task is to disentangle yourself from the pendulum in whatever way possible. But bear in mind that it is almost impossible not to react. Suppressing your emotions is useless. Instead, give your attention to something else. Try listening to your own music, but do not turn the volume up too loud, just enough to fade out your neighbor's music. Find other ways of distracting yourself. If you can find something else to occupy your thoughts, your neighbors will gradually quiet down. The same thing applies in other cases. If the gesture is jumping, it means that your attention has been caught in the pendulum's noose, and you have been enticed into the pendulum's game, the objective of which is to increase the energy of conflict. To free yourself from the pendulum's noose, you must refocus your attention on something else. In general, things are not too bad. Things will not happen to spite you if your consciousness is awake. You may, of course, be thinking that the above is some kind of weird nonsense. It can be hard to get your head around the idea that certain entities can control us. Whether you accept this knowledge or not is a matter of personal choice. Do not take it on faith either. Observe and then draw your own conclusions. The pendulum rule. In the world today, at every turn, we are forced to encounter direct or indirect material related to sexual relationships. In the transurfing model, this theme, just like many others, is approached from an unusual angle. Sex, or rather our relationship to sex, plays a hugely significant role in our personal lives, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. It does not matter whether a person has an active sex life. From time to time, everyone has flashes of thought that express their relationship to sex. There can be no neutral attitude to sex. Human nature will always reveal itself eventually. Some people's relationship to sex is expressed in annoyance, ridicule, and rejection. In others, it is transformed into intention. If the intention is left unrealized or is realized unsuccessfully, all sorts of complexes or, as expressed in transurfing terms, negative slides emerge in the human psyche. It is fair to say that to some extent the issues of sex concern, if not everybody, then the vast majority of people. And many people have hang-ups when it comes to sexual relationships. Pendulums play a significant role here too because they will try their hardest to convince you that you are less than perfect and have certain problems. You are not alone in this belief. You would not imagine how many other people think the same about themselves. You are deeply mistaken if you think you have difficulties in your sex life while everyone else's is fantastic. This is an illusion artificially created by pendulums with the help of the media. You may have noticed that wherever the theme of sex comes up, we are shown people who are totally okay. If you were to take a stadium full of people and then remove everyone who had a problem, there would be no more people left standing than the fingers on your hands. Imagine standing in the middle of a huge stadium that has suddenly emptied, and you are looking about you in search of the remaining normal few. This would be more realistically reflective of the actual proportions. Even if your friends who brag about their conquests are not exaggerating, you can be sure that they too have their issues which they carefully hide, not only from others, but from themselves. We are not going to indulge in Freudian references here, as Freud could hardly have imagined the scale of sex mania that has developed today. But it is worth asking yourself why such a simple function, perfected by nature, should cause so many problems. The answer to this question is to be found in a quite unexpected area, which is to some extent linked with the flash mob phenomenon. If you do not know exactly what this is, let me explain. Imagine a busy street or town square on a Sunday. Everything is the same as normal, and then suddenly several dozen people get out umbrellas as if it were raining. The ordinary passers-by stand there with their jaws dropping, while the rain people have a blast. This type of trick is very easy to organize. A group of people that are not necessarily already acquainted agree over the internet that at a prearranged time in a specific place, there will be a signal to carry out some kind of silly activity. What is actually happening during the event? As you know, when a group of people start thinking in the same way, a pendulum is created. The flash mob thinks, "Look at us with our umbrellas." The other passerby stand by with their mouths open, and bewildered, ask, "Whatever are they up to?" The uniform thought of energy of the group creates a resonant energy which is swallowed by the pendulum. The flash pendulum is the shortest lived of all the pendulums. It flares up and then burns out without causing anyone any harm. This harmless example illustrates how longer lasting and more destructive pendulums are created and how well they work. What makes people emit energy in a specific direction? It requires a code of behavior and agreed upon type of thinking. There must be a set rule. Naturally, the rules are made by people, not by the pendulums. Pendulums emerge spontaneously, generated by the rule that has been created, and are not capable of manifesting conscious intention. The pendulum rule is the worst and most harmful thing in humanity, and it sounds, "Do as I do." Any codes of behavior or thinking come down to following the pendulum rule. If you spend a little time observing life, you will see examples of this rule time and time again. Of course, it does not always cause harm. For example, a wave made by fans at a stadium creates a flash pendulum which feeds from the resonant energy, but no one is any worse for it. In a concert hall, the pendulum will be enthusiastically consuming the energy of the audience. There is no harm in this either. However, watch how performers sometimes behave on stage when they use the pendulum's rule to stir up the audience. "Higher, raise up your arms, all together now." The audience obediently starts clapping, and the energy created, which would be tiny if it were emanated by just one individual, develops into a resonance, creating an invisible monster that hangs above the stage. If the pendulum did not swallow the energy, the artist would literally fly up into the air. As it is, the artist just gets a few crumbs that are left after the pendulum has devoured the rest. While the audience follows the rule, "Do as I do," the monster lives. Okay, so what? Nothing bad has happened after all. Flash mobs are harmless. This is true. But what does this all have to do with sex? You will never guess. We started by talking about sex and then moved on to flash mobs. So what do they have in common? You probably think that it is something to do with energy. And in fact, while two people are having sex, a flash pendulum emerges that swallows the resonance energy. People in ancient times suspected or knew that a certain entity hangs above the act. In various cultures, this essence or entity, which is referred to in the transurfing model as a flash pendulum, is usually attributed an emotionally laden symbol such as the amusement of Satan, and some followers of occult practice believe that during the sexual act, energy is radiated that attracts various representatives of the subtle planes that settle in and have their devilish orgy. Whatever people tell you, there is no need to be concerned because a flash pendulum cannot harm you. It simply feeds on energy that you are spending anyway. But this is not the point I'm trying to make. The main thing that unites sex in its modern day form is the pendulum rule. Do as I do. With the development of digital media, the pendulum rule has achieved total domination. At every step, the human psyche is constantly being subjected to invisible but highly efficient conditioning stereotypes of behavior and thinking. I am cautious to use the word zombify here, but essentially this is where it's all going. The modern information and entertainment industry is based on one simple principle. Watch how other people become successful and follow them. Let them be your example. What the industry is trying to demonstrate is the benchmark of success. You know this perfectly well already, but you may not have stopped to consider the magnitude of the propaganda's influence, which is sometimes obvious, but more often than not, subtle and gradual. In particular, this is the case with everything relating to intimacy. In this context, the stereotypes of what it should be like are very deeply rooted. Printed materials and videos on the theme demonstrate relationships which we are supposed to believe meet the necessary standards. I do not want to create the impression that I'm talking about some kind of plot or intentional propaganda. No one actually sets themselves the goal of instilling certain patterns or molds. It happens automatically. The problem is that people always have room for doubt in their thoughts. Am I doing the right thing? There's always the need to compare, for success is relative. Hence, when a person witnesses someone else's success, they naturally tend to perceive it as a benchmark in their own life. Intimate relationships and sex in particular normally have their place in a tight, closed circle, and consequently, the need for confirmation that we are okay increases. If a person does not currently have a partner, or if they have never had a partner, they start frantically searching for an example of how things should be. Of course, the media fulfills this need, offering all its audience a huge choice of models. This is how common stereotypes of how to do it and what your image should be, etc., emerge. For example, he is tough and macho, and she is sultry and sexy. You are supposed to observe them and do what they do. And if you do not match the example, there must be something wrong with you. It is difficult to fathom the full destructiveness of this rule. You might think that I am overestimating the importance of the issue when I say that the pendulum rule is the worst and most harmful thing humanity has ever invented. And yet, not at all. I express myself quite modestly. The number of broken marriages is enormous, and the number of happy families that never were is perhaps even greater. The main reason for separation is ultimately lack of fulfillment in the sexual relationship. Everything else is either a consequence of the lack of fulfillment or an excuse when people do not want to acknowledge the true cause of their problems. Lack of fulfillment occurs as a consequence of the fact that the couple follow the pendulum rule. They both know that in accordance with the model, they must do it like this and like that. The pendulum rule sounds, do as I do, which means change yourself and betray yourself. People try and adjust to the established standard, and as a result, they experience inner discomfort and dissatisfaction. The mistake people usually make when they have a problem with sex is that they are trying to play a role. It is very simple. Of numerous models, the individual chooses the one that suits them the most, and another for their partner. As the relationship continues, the individual adopts their particular role and projects their corresponding expectations on their partner. The amazing thing is that the role is usually played according to the principle of transurfing, dispassionately, in the style of the participating member of the audience, because they are constantly comparing themselves and their partner to the standard model, wondering whether everything is working out right. As a result, things go pear-shaped because the nature of sex is that it requires being relaxed, free, and devoted. Sex is the only instance when you have to become totally immersed and forget about roles totally. When sex is natural and normal, it is a game played according to rules that you made up yourselves without giving a moment's thought to how others do it or how it is supposed to be done. Things become even more complex when the notions of love and sex are confused. It is sickening to hear the often sanctimonious use of the expression, "let's make love." Would not it be simpler to call a spade a spade? Sex is not love, and love is not sex. Are they compatible? Indeed they are, but that does not change the fact that love is not sex, and sex is not love. They can be combined and they can exist independently of one another, but the pendulum rule stops this from happening naturally. I would say that the nature of all problems experienced in sexual relationships is linked with the fact that in following the pendulum rule, people try to artificially combine love and sex. The result is a kind of awkward hybrid. If you forget about the rules and standard models, it is actually all very straightforward. Imagine a scale with 0 at the center. The values to the left indicate affection and to the right, aggression. If the arrow shifts to the left, then it is love. If it shifts to the right, then it is sex. Whether you like it or not, sex is more about aggression than affection. Many people are shy or fearful when their devilish instincts are awakened, thinking that it is somehow unnatural. In reality, what happens is that two people meet, and at first their behavior shows no sign of anything unusual. But then they get a predatory glint in their eyes and start doing things that do not fit with what exactly? Here the pendulum rule comes into play. On the one hand, accepted notions of decency do exist, which it would be inappropriate to defy. On the other hand, within these boundaries of decency, it is impossible to take full pleasure from sex. We want both. In order to fit with the standard model of things, people start playing certain roles. Fearing their animal instincts, they water sex down with what they consider to be necessary ritual. This in turn evokes a certain amount of inhibition. When two people should be letting go the reins, the pendulum rule will not allow them to. And the opposite is true. When the arrow moves far to the side of aggression, the need for reassurance arises. Do you love me? So there are always two participating members of the audience on the stage. They are like puppets hanging on the strings of control they have attached themselves to. What are they really doing? They are desperately trying to pull the arrow to one side or the other. All they would have to do would be to ditch the pendulum rule and let go of the arrow, letting it move freely in correlation with the feelings of the heart and not the ideas of the mind. Some may protest that in this way we would be reduced to the level of animals, but once again, this is the pendulum rule at work. Who set the boundaries for where humanity ends and the level of animals begins? It's even so much a matter of where this level actually is, so much as that each individual has to make their own rules rather than following rules set by others. As a human being, you have the right to establish your own criteria for humanity and decency. I hope you understand that I'm writing this for the benefit of those who have certain issues around sex, especially for those who love each other. All that is required to eliminate the problem is to let go of the arrow as consciously as you maintain control over observing the pendulum rule. There is also a certain type of person who experiences no problems at all in their sex life. Many issues cease to have weight if you can just be direct and speak about things the way they are without confusing different notions and being consciously aware of what you wish to get out of a relationship and being able to communicate it to your partner. Life becomes instantly easier the moment you behave openly. You can be certain that your partner also has their own hidden desires. What should you do if a situation arises where one person desires something their partner finds unacceptable? Firstly, it is important to remember the first principle of frailing. Let go of the intention to receive and replace it with the one to give, and you will receive the very thing you let go of. This wonderful principle works every time, even if you do not always understand how. Secondly, you have to reject the pendulum rule totally and replace it with the rule of transurfing, which sounds, be yourself and allow others to be themselves also. As you know, in order to feel fulfilled by a sexual relationship, you have to feel free and uninhibited. You cannot feel free if you are carrying excess potential in the form of complexes such as an inferiority complex. However, much you try to relax, balanced forces will not allow you to do so. But the majority of tension arises not so much as a result of balanced forces, but as a result of dependent relationships. Inner intention is predominantly aimed at receiving rather than giving. In addition, people usually hang projections on their partner in accordance with their expectation of a given role. We just do not seem to want to let other people be themselves. As you know, dependent relationships generate polarization. which evokes the winds of balanced forces and ruin everything. The transurfing rule instantly neutralizes the polarization created by the dependent relationship. And so, even if you cannot get rid of your complexes, you can follow the transurfing rule, which will noticeably reduce the tension. To be yourself means accepting yourself as you are in all your imperfection. Allowing another to be themselves means taking back the projection of your own expectations of them. As a result, any situation in which one person wants something another would find unacceptable is automatically resolved. I repeat that all you need to do is reject the pendulum rule, replace it with the transurfing rule, and then direct your intention in accordance with the first principle of frailing. If both partners in a couple can do this, they should not experience any further problems in the relationship. I will leave more detailed explanations for why this works to the psychologists, but it works. That is all. In a more general sense, why should the pendulum need its rule? You can see that in the case of flash pendulums, they feed on resonance energy, and so they require synchronized action. But what keeps more long-lasting pendulums going who do not require their adherents to act as one? Above all, the pendulum rule establishes behavioral norms and types of thinking, i.e., standard models of what is considered normal. People do not understand that they are being offered a product, a surrogate success. Someone else's success can never serve as an example in the sense of a model to be replicated. True success is only achieved by those who have the courage to break the rules and go their own way. When you follow in someone else's footsteps, you are sentenced to the eternal task of trying to catch the setting sun. Standards of success are a mirage, but people do not know, or perhaps do not want to know, that the pendulum rule traps them in a web of illusion. Illusions are often sweeter, more convenient, and clearer than reality and the unknown. When a person comes face to face with the fact that they do not fit with the established standards, they experience inner discomfort. They are filled with a fear of failure, feel inadequate, and all alone in a hostile world. What can they do? Rejection is one option. A person often surrounds themselves with a wall of their rejection, of unattainable models of success. Or they continue chasing after the model following the pendulum rule, trying to change themselves and forcing their soul into a box of social conditioning. This approach leads only to dissatisfaction and a lack of fulfillment, and once again the person tries to change. When people chase after standard models, they radiate the energy of dissatisfaction and disappointment. It is inevitable. It is the same as a donkey going round in circles after a carrot. This is the energy that destructive pendulums feed on. The wall of rejection in turn requires no less energy. It is very hard to maintain a defense field around you all the time when everywhere and at every step you are being bombarded with rules you are unable to observe. There is a way out of the labyrinth, though. The way out lies in refusing to allow the pendulum rule and walking your own path. Those who manage it acquire a unique quality that takes your breath away: inner freedom. There are people who have this quality, and the lady who wrote the letter below is standing just a step or two away from this freedom. I am nearly 30 years old and I have never been with a man. The sexologists say that this is a serious abnormality, but I do not see why. It is not written anywhere that you have to sleep with someone before you hit 25, or that virginity should be punished on moral grounds. I am an attractive woman, and there have been plenty of opportunities for an intimate relationship, but the truth is I have not wanted to. The problem is not psychological. Everything is okay on that front too. I just have not yet met a man who I have felt I wanted to go to bed with. Recently, though, the issue has been weighing on me more heavily because everyone is indulging in carnal love except me. It is natural, and I am an exception to the rule. I have never felt enslaved to social stereotypes, but this part of social conditioning is evidently really beginning to get to me. Sometimes I feel like I am some kind of moralistic freak. The fact of my solitude does not affect my self-esteem because not sleeping with someone I do not feel particularly drawn to is a conscious decision. Am I really an exception, abnormal in some way? I said a step or two away because you still have a fear of being different. Nonetheless, you clearly have inner strength and are independent. Obviously, you are not abnormal. You just must not be afraid that you are not like everyone else. Be happy about it, although, of course, there is no need to go over the top. Perhaps you could lower the bar of your expectations and approach things more simply. If we judged by the information we are constantly being bombarded with, you would think that having sex is all people ever do, but this is an illusion. Far from everyone leads an active way of life in this context, and many people do not have a partner at all. But fear of loneliness and being different cause people to buy into the illusion. Take Paris, for example. With its air of freedom and relaxed atmosphere, Paris has won the reputation of being the city of lonely hearts. Every day, clearly in the morning, people rush out and tour the many cafes. Why? After all, they could have their coffee at home. Loneliness drives them out of their homes. It might seem as if pendulums deliberately enslave society to its rules. They do enslave people, but they do not set the rules. They exist because of the rule. The rule creates the pendulum, and only then does it start doing its dirty deed. The main feature of the pendulum that makes it so destructive is that it leads people away from the path that could make them truly happy. Imagine a busy street where everyone is going about their own affairs when suddenly figures dressed in black appear and make everyone line up and start marching. One person tries to walk away, but they are immediately and crudely forced to rejoin the line. You! Stop! Where do you think you're going? Get back in line. It is no coincidence that the film The Matrix was made. Science fiction has a tendency to become reality over time, and this tendency is accelerating. If you observe carefully, you will see that the gulf between science fiction and physical reality is becoming ever narrower. Of course, people do not lie in containers with suction cups attached to their bodies, but the analogy is pretty close. People think that the line is reality. In fact, it is the requirement to stand in line that is the illusion. True reality lies in the fact that you can break the line and go your own path. It is just not that easy to have this awareness. People are so used to living with their illusions that they need a really good shake, or as Carlos Castaneda would have said, a shift to the assemblage point before they can discern the difference between reality and illusion. People who are handicapped are genuinely in a position of having no choice. They either suffer their entire lives, tortured by their deficiency, or neglect the pendulum rule. If a person understands that they have nothing to lose, they give up chasing after standard models and begin living for their own pleasure. Invalids who play basketball in their wheelchairs are infinitely happier than able-bodied teenagers trying to copy Michael Jordan. These teenagers even come across as being less natural because they march in line. None of them will actually become anything like Michael Jordan until they realize that they need to break out of the line. Those who break the pendulum rule either become leaders or renegades. Some make their way to stardom while others end up social outcasts. The difference between them is that the former know that they have the right to break the pendulum rule, while the latter still have doubts. Stars are born, but pendulums light them up. Those that dare to break out of line become new models of success. Pendulums will not put up with individuality. They see a rising star and have no choice other than to make it their favorite. Then a new rule is made. The line turns around and marches after a new star. Can you see what is happening? In order to break out of the line, you have to know how. If you fight against the figures in black, you will lose. In the battle against pendulums, you will always be defeated. The secret lies in leaving the line without a fight. You can walk away calmly, smiling and waving goodbye to the figures in black, and then go your own way. They will do everything they can to force you back in line, but ultimately there is not anything they can do if you do not enter into conflict with them. In order to fully understand this simple truth, you have to first reconsider your current worldview. In the world we live in today, many things have been turned on their head. In this sense, transurfing puts everything in its place and assists in resisting the pendulum rule. It is true that many people will be averse to the idea that they are caught up in a matrix. Transurfing will not be of any interest to those who prefer for their ego to stay sleeping. We all receive the things we choose. An illusion is also a choice, and anyone who prefers to stay with the illusion has every right to do so. It is not my intention to force information on anyone, neither do I feel obliged to prove my ideas. Anyone can put the principles shared here into practice and prove or discredit them as they see fit. I am simply the person walking past who says, "Hey, did you know that there is something called transurfing reality?" "Really? Yep, that's where I am headed, but you can go wherever you like." That is all. Stabilizing the structure. In accordance with its law, the pendulum does all it can to augment the energy of an existing conflict. The battles from which pendulums draw their energy are constantly going around us, and they usually involve two or more opposing structures. There are many examples of this: war, revolution, competition, and other forms of confrontation. However, besides demonstrating aggression towards its enemies, another distinguishing feature of any pendulum is its drive to maintain and strengthen the structure that makes its very existence possible. Information energy entities are formed and grow simultaneously with the emergence of an ordered structure created by living representatives of the natural world. The existence of any pendulum is wholly dependent on the stability levels of the newly created structure. So, the pendulum will do anything necessary to stabilize its structure. This is the second law of the pendulum. As an illustration of this law, let us take the very simple example of a school of baby fish. The school behaves as if it were a single organism. If you frighten it from one side, all the fish turn and swim in the opposite direction synchronously. How is this phenomenon of synchronism explained? If we assume that every individual fish is reacting to the movements of the next fish swimming beside it, then the response to the disturbance would take on a chain-like effect. However fast the signal was passed on to the other fish in the school, there would still be some kind of delay between the response times of different fish. The point here is that there is no delay. The school can grow to quite large proportions, and yet the same synchronism is observed. Birds demonstrate the same behavior. If you have ever seen a large flock of small but fast-moving birds, you will have noticed what incredible coordination is expressed in their movements back and forth. Perhaps what we are seeing is the workings of a different kind of mechanism, for example, some kind of telepathic contact. This is unlikely, though. In water, where there are no schools of fish, if you frighten one fish, another situated just 1 meter away will not respond at all. So it is not a matter of telepathic communication. The signal is transferred only when the fish are together in a school, which in essence represents an extremely simple structure. Or could it be that no signal is being transferred at all? Let us take the example of a higher level structure such as an anthill. Science has not yet been able to provide a persuasive explanation on how a colony is run. In an anthill, there is an absence of social hierarchy, and yet incredibly, there is precise allocation of duty, enabling all the insects to work in a coordinated manner, as in any other organization run by centralized management. Ants communicate with each other by excreting odorous substances called pheromones. Trails of odor enable them to find their way home and locate food. However, this does not explain how information is simultaneously passed to all colony members. There is no question of any higher form of information exchange existing between the ants. Otherwise, why would they be using such a primitive data source as odors? So what does unite individual members into an organized colony? The answer is the pendulum. At the same time that the structure is created and developed, an informational energy entity is formed which adopts the function of managing and stabilizing that structure. Direct and feedback links exist between the pendulum and structural elements. The pendulum exists on account of the energy of its adherents, and it synchronizes their activity, uniting them in one organized community. It may seem from the outside that the structure is itself self-organizing, but this is not the case. Self-organization is only applicable to inanimate nature, where the laws of physics serve as the organizing principle. For example, during the process of crystallization, water molecules are arranged into a lattice structure, which is determined by the shape of the molecules and the forces of interaction. Uniting living organisms into a structure requires the presence of an outer organizing factor. That factor is the pendulum. How exactly the pendulum carries out its organizing function, no one can yet say. Evidently, a certain type of informational energy exchange takes place between the entity and the living organism. Any structure that unites living organisms has a pendulum as a controlling superstructure. However, one cannot say that the pendulum controls the structure via quality of reason because it is not capable of conscious intention. The consciousness of an informational energy entity is similar to an algorithm. Rather than implementing a design in the way that an intelligent being does, it manages the structure roughly as a program directs the working of an automatic device. The extent to which the elements of the structure act automatically depends on their level of awareness. The more primitive the living organism is, the less idea it will have of its motives and actions. When a being lives in isolation, its actions are determined by the internal program of its own set of instincts. However, when living beings come together in a group, an outer program of the pendulum begins to take effect, directing the behavior of the community as a whole. The aggressive world in which all beings eat each other developed as a consequence of the first law of the pendulum. Given that aggression is a product of the pendulum, it does not have to be a necessary feature of the natural world. Confirmation of this can be found in various corners of the planet. For example, as in New Zealand, a country with hardly any predators. Many inhabitants of the earth have to unite in groups in order to secure their survival in a hazardous environment. Pendulums force living beings to become elements of a given structure according to the principle, okay, if you want to survive, do as I do. People also have a tendency to gather in groups according to their interests. This can be explained by the fact that it is easier for them to communicate with others who are like-minded. It might seem strange, but many people experience difficulties communicating. However effortless interpersonal relationships might seem on the surface, they are incredibly strained for a variety of reasons, inner and outer. In order to establish a closer contact with one another, people instinctively look for something they have in common that can potentially unite them. This is where the establishing function of the pendulum comes in. When two people in conversation are swaying to the same pendulum, they are on the same wavelength and easily find a common language. This enables the relationship to acquire a quality of ease, making it possible to have a smoke or a drink, sit and have a special meal together, go camping, play a game, etc. Indeed, the most impressive illustration of the second law of the pendulum must be the birth of human civilization. Have you ever wondered how cities came into being? Why did people who had lived for thousands of years in nomadic camps and villages suddenly start building civilized settlements? What were they based on? Craft? Trade? War, perhaps? The most ancient cities in the world date to the same period as the pyramids. Caral, for example, was discovered quite recently in Peru. This lost city stood unnoticed by archaeologists for almost 5,000 years. It was finally discovered when it turned out that raised hills in the desert were once pyramids, one of which equaled in size to the Egyptian pyramids. Archaeologists were surprised to find that excavations yielded no evidence of ceramic ware or weaponry. The people of that time used primitive tools made from wood, stone, and bone. It was later established that the inhabitants of the city grew cotton and made fishing nets, which they exchanged for fish with the inhabitants of shoreline areas. And yet the inhabitants of a village could have easily engaged in the same livelihood. There were no defense structures surrounding Caral, which rules out the question of a military prehistory to the city. So what caused the emergence of this city? From ancient times, human beings had lived in villages engaging in primitive forms of craftsmanship, either trading or busy waging wars with other factions inhabiting the same region. And yet they did all this without needing to construct stone towns or erect pyramids. In all likelihood, the pendulum served as the organizing factor, or more precisely, the stabilizing factor for these settlements. It is impossible to say exactly why this happens. The truth is never to be found far away. Likely as not at a certain point in time, a pendulum structure is spontaneously formed which carries the capacity for further development. For a city is in essence a complex pendulum hierarchy of production, consumption, and exchange. If the construction of the self-organizing system is stable at the outset, then it will expand and strengthen. The structure may even evolve into the formation of a complex civilization. This process will continue until such time as a defect in the architecture brings the gigantic construction tumbling down. Of course, there is a long way to go before that happens to us, although it all depends. Let us go back to life as it is now. The human beings are more awake in comparison to other representatives of the animate world, and yet, are we always consciously aware of our actions? The human mind is capable of creating complex structures and mechanisms, building whole cities and researching the world we live in, and yet, in the context of awareness, man has not developed much further than the animal kingdom. All of society is organized into a complex structure consisting of separate formations from the family to large corporations and whole nations. Like in nature, if a person lives in relatively isolated conditions, they are consciously responsible for their actions. As we know, enlightenment was reached by those who isolated themselves from society. However, once a person becomes an element of a structure to a large degree, they are asleep, which does not appear to hinder the mind from engaging in advanced technological production. A modern-day factory is a lot more complex than an anthill, and yet in essence, both structures are controlled by pendulums. All achievements of scientific and technological progress, if considered all together, are the products of a structure rather than a specific individual. The television as a piece of apparatus is the invention of one man, but television in the wider sense of television broadcasting is the product of an entire system, which is controlled by a pendulum. When a person becomes an element of a larger structure, they are obliged to follow the pendulum rule. As a result, an unavoidable contradiction arises between the individual's personal interests and the conditions imposed by the structure. The worst thing is when a person is not aware of this and obediently toils and sweats away for the system, unable to take the time to lift their head up, look around, and become conscious of what they're doing. You may think this is all nonsense. Why do you think that I am not aware? Quite the opposite. I am perfectly aware of what I am doing, why and wherefore I am doing it. Unlikely. Children's summer camps are a good example. The vulnerable psyche of teenagers, relatively free from lessons, serves as a fertile soil from which pendulums can sprout. Due to their aggressive essence, pendulums create an environment in which the spirit of competition can blossom. In this environment, if you are in some way different to all the others, i.e., you do not meet the parameters of the structure, you can be made a mockery, or be driven out of the herd, or simply beat up. In these conditions, the teenager falls into a deadly waking sleep. They live as if they were in a dream, unable to take full account of their actions, either as part of the crowd or in opposition to it. The sedative is the heavy residue competitive relationships leave them with, and the strong suspicion of their own inadequacy and inability to keep up with the standards. Teenager is never for a minute free of the feelings of oppression and weariness, even if to all other intent and purposes they appear calm, confident, and buoyant. It is the same feeling of oppression bordering on hopelessness that a person experiences in non-lucid dreaming when they are at the total mercy of what is happening at the dream. Life in an aggressive environment happens to the individual like in dreaming. A rapid flow of circumstances carries the individual along, forcing all their awareness to be focused on just staying afloat and keeping an anxious eye open in anticipation of the next thing. Unless a teenager has a strong sense of self which gives them an inner strength to hold to, they begin instinctively, even subconsciously, looking for another source of strength to strengthen their position. The pendulum is there to offer this support, but not freely, only in exchange for submitting to the rules of the structure. In an environment like a summer camp, there always seem to be a few raucous, boisterous kids who appear to be extremely confident and feel quite at home. Their false confidence relies on the strength offered by the pendulum. Imagine two kids like this, one a slacker and the other a prankster. Hey you, look at me, do as I do, do as I do. Hey you, what are you waiting for? Stop picking your nose, chill, have some fun, man. No one else realizes that these two kids are dangling on the pendulum's hook like a puppet on a string. The source of strength, although ephemeral, creates the illusion. The others see how confident the puppets are and act in a similar manner. They too gain a source of strength in exchange for the following rule: do as I do. Eventually, they all end up dangling together as one, the slackers and the pranksters. This is how the structure is made. The important thing to realize is that the pendulum's adherents comply with the rule unconsciously. They are totally under the illusion that this is the right thing to do. In following the rule, the adherents can get away with doing whatever they want to, so long as they follow suit. For example, people do not just swear when they are arguing anymore. They swear as part of their ordinary speech. It does not occur to anyone anymore that swearing is vulgar. Vulgarity is a sign of poor taste and low social class. It is the same as not washing or wearing dirty clothes. People might not be wearing their dirty clothing at the moment, but they surely will as soon as someone makes it a rule to do so. For example, at the court of the French King Louis IX, no one ever washed because the king had a pathological aversion to hygiene and reduced it to rinsing his hands in cognac. The court members were obliged to follow his example, and to conceal the unpleasant odor coming from their bodies, they doused themselves in perfume, as a result of which a heavy stench reigned throughout the palace grounds. And because they all inevitably suffered from lice, the dames and cavaliers introduced the sophisticated habit of carrying fine sticks around, enabling them to scratch themselves in a delicate manner. As you can see, the rule is capable of rehabilitating any nonsense at all. The main point is that those who observe the rule act absolutely the same, en masse, like a flock of sheep. For example, the first person who ever said wicked should consider themselves a true shepherd. But everyone else after who repeats this, and other convenient words like parrots in a chorus, act just exactly like sheep. Do you recall the school of baby fish? Has humanity really progressed very far in terms of consciousness? It is not only teenagers who are subject to the influence of pendulums, it is also the adults, especially when they come together in a crowd. For example, at a meeting when someone or something is being discussed by a group, a person may find that they can suddenly stand up and start a huge spiel, taking themselves quite by surprise. In hindsight, they will wonder how on earth they got through it and convince themselves for ages that everything they said was right. The crowd forces its members to behave in a certain way that is often uncharacteristic. This is how the pendulum influences those who seek a source of strength and security. So if someone thinks they have found security within a structure, what of it? This is one solution to the problem. But you should bear in mind that if you observe the structure's rules, you can forget about your individuality. You will be like everyone else and find peace and security. At the same time, you relinquish your divine gift, the uniqueness of your soul on which the genius part of yourself depends, to say nothing of the fact that unity of heart and mind becomes impossible. When a person is entirely under the power of the structure, they are almost entirely unconscious and unable to perceive the voice of the heart, which means they will never search for their true path and will spend their life in backbreaking service to the structure. I am not saying that everyone's personal path can only be found beyond the limits of a given structure. Of course, you can disappear into the mountains and cut yourself off from the world of pendulums, but if life continues to be a subconscious waking dream in the mountains as well, then you will not change a thing. The challenge is to remain the captain of your fate while you are within the structure. Is it possible, for example, to acquire the self-confidence a child so needs without submitting to the pendulum's rule, or becoming a social outcast? Easily. All you have to do is wake up and observe the scene through the eyes of an observer while you are still on the stage. Then it immediately becomes evident who are the pendulum's favorites, the slackers and the pranksters and adherents who follow the rules. You must not judge or disdain people for following the rule. If as a result of your awareness of the way of things, you start comparing yourself to those who are asleep, dependent relationships arise, polarization occurs, and the awakened one inevitably becomes an outcast. It is very important to remember that it is not enough to simply reject the pendulum's rule. You have to replace it with the transurfing rule, be yourself, and allow others to do the same. Then you will be able to find your source of strength and security within. Once you understand what is happening around you, you are already halfway home. This knowledge alone brings a reliable, calm belief in oneself, because lack of self-confidence comes from the fear of the unknown. When a person is unfamiliar with the rules of the game, the world seems scary and hostile. Then feelings of loneliness and depression take over, sending you to sleep and making you submit to the pendulum's rule. Knowing all this, you are now capable of turning life into a conscious waking dream, which means having control over a situation. Either you become a shepherd, or at the very least, you stop being a sheep. As far as strengthening your position goes, we have talked about this in quite a lot of detail in the theory of transurfing. Firstly, you have to be rid of feelings of guilt, which means you have to stop justifying yourself and explaining your actions to others who have the outright audacity to judge you. Secondly, stop protecting or proving your worth. If you follow the transurfing rule at the same time, then these two things will be more than enough to acquire a sense of strength and security within, i.e., to begin living in accordance with your own beliefs. Bear in mind that you cannot simply thoughtlessly oppose a given structure, desperately trying to be rid of its influence. I should repeat that we are not talking about freeing yourself from pendulums entirely, but about how to avoid being a puppet on a string. Once you are awake, you will feel and see how the structure weighs on you when it tries to impose its own rules. Then you will be able to decide for yourself whether you want to refuse to follow their rules or whether you want to observe them. The important thing is to make a conscious decision while others are asleep. This is the strategy of the person who is a master of the situation. As an example, I cite a letter which is quite characteristic. Why is it sometimes the case that when you do your work to a high standard, or do even more than is expected, suggesting new ideas that are very well received, no one notices it, and someone else gets to take the credit? Even if there is a raise in salary available, I am quickly forgotten, as if I had not even been in the running. And if I am initially offered a small promotion, in the process of formalizing it, someone else takes the position before me, or it is postponed. It is as if I am invisible. Why does this happen? It would appear that the reader who asked this question works in the administrative system. Any system is a pendulum. The informational energy structure first arises in the form of a set of ideas and principles, and then it is materialized materially, i.e., into a system. The system then starts to develop independently, submitting its adherents to its laws. Pendulums place their adherents in key positions not based on merit and high service, but based on how fully they fit into the system. It would be naive to think that on the career ladder or in the powerarchy, people are arranged according to their distinguishing qualities and achievements. Perhaps this is the case to some degree, but nonetheless, distinguishing qualities and achievements are not the main thing. The most important criteria is not how well a person carries out their work, so much as how correctly they do it from the point of view of the system. The pendulum is most concerned with stability, and so first and foremost, you should direct your actions towards supporting the system's stability. If you want to climb up the career ladder, you have to understand the difference between well and correctly. Here, everything depends on the team. Pendulums are different too. In the majority of teams, creativity, initiative, enthusiasm, and independence are welcomed. But in the case of a management apparatus or large enterprise, the laws and ethics are totally different, i.e., corporative. Corporate ethics entail much more stringent regulations, discipline, and diligence. Taking the initiative can be punished, independence can be met with caution, and creativity far from playing the most important role. In this type of system, you have to be more correct, not better. So you have to be able to behave in a conscious and flexible manner in line with the reality of the pendulum world. It is not as difficult as it might seem. The important thing is to wake up sooner rather than later. The indigo arrivals. One of the clearest manifestations of the onset of a new reality is the phenomenon known as the indigo children, described in detail in the book of the same name by Lee Carroll and Jan Tober. The term was coined by the clairvoyant Nancy Ann Tapp, who researched the connections between a person's personality and the color of their aura. At the beginning of the 1970s, Nancy Tapp discovered an unusual phenomenon. Children of a new kind were entering the world with a previously unseen color in their aura, indigo, blue-violet. The indigo children were shown to be different in personality to other people. They often diagnosed with their hyperactive disorder and attention deficit disorder. They have difficulty sitting still unless they are doing something they find interesting. Not all children who display these disorders are necessarily indigo, and vice versa. Every child is different. What all indigo children have in common is an inherent sense of status and dignity and a strong independent spirit. The indigo child does not doubt their worth for a moment, as if they were confident that they deserve a place here in this life. That is just how they are. These children surprise adults displaying a wisdom and awareness that is beyond their years. Indigo children will not conform in order to fit into society and have low tolerance of authority figures. The indigo child is an independent thinker. To them, it seems quite obvious that certain things should be done differently, while other people follow widely accepted norms and rules. You certainly would not call the indigo child pliant or accommodating. Indigo children can be very difficult to bring up and fail to respond to usual forms of discipline. They are also very intelligent. To some degree, these qualities are typical of every new generation, but the indigo children are particularly different to other children. For thousands of years, the generation shift has been fairly uniform and measured. Recently, however, a quickening in the process of generational renewal has been observed. Each new generation is even more radically different from the previous generation. The first generation indigo children now have their own children who, in their development, have already gone beyond the characteristic qualities of their parents. So what is happening here? The process of the revolutionary renewal of human consciousness does not occur without cause. As we know, in nature and in society, everything strives towards balance. Consciousness renewal therefore develops in counterbalance to some other process. It is not difficult to guess what this process is. Over recent decades, at the same time as information and telecommunication systems, a powerful network of pendulums has developed, ensnaring the entire planet. Scientific and technological progress is not as scary as its informational component, which creates fertile soil for the birth and existence of pendulums. The larger the group of adherents who think in the same way, the more powerful the pendulum, and the more power it can exert. To gain control over a large number of people, you do not have to place them in containers with suction cups attached to their bodies like in the film The Matrix. It is enough to create an all-encompassing information network, because then people will automatically take their places in its cells. So what does a person in an information cell look like? It is the so-called social element whose level of consciousness is conditioned by their place in the structure, which in reality is similar to the matrix. The structure imperceptibly but persistently envelops each member with a set of conditioned thought and behavior patterns. People think they are acting according to their own free will, but in reality they have no conception of true freedom because the configuration is created by the structure. Each individual plays their role with the will they have been designated in a play that has been imposed upon them. It would appear that everyone is free to do what they want. We are declared to have this freedom. The only thing is that we can only want things that coincide with the interests of the structure. The structure teaches us to want what it needs us to want. This process of enslaving individual will, or intention, is what we are going to look at next. By nature, this process is synergistic. That is, it is self-organizing because pendulums do not have the capacity of conscious intention. Everything happens of its own accord as ice crystals form in the process of freezing. The pendulum network is like a colony of parasitic plants that covers the Earth's entire biosphere. This is potentially a frightening thought. Some might be amused by it. How we respond to this type of information is a very personal thing. If you like, you can attribute all this to the realms of science fiction, and yet when everyday reality adopts an unfamiliar form, its tough realism goes beyond even the boldest examples of science fiction. But let us get back to the kids. The tendency to enslave the will has generated a response in the form of a type of child that strives for independence. Their appearance is the result of a natural process and the action of balanced forces in response to the pendulum network. On the one hand, pendulums try to organize the world, driving people into structures similar to the Matrix. On the other hand, the indigos even out the pendulum's domination as if thereby fulfilling a predetermined mission. The children's behavior is aimed at challenging established systems. Whenever they find themselves squeezed in to fit the boundaries of conditioned stereotypes, they strive to break free. All children, but indigo children especially, are very sensitive to excess potential. For example, they recognize falsity immediately. When an adult tries to ingratiate themselves, they answer back, and if you praise them too much, they start playing up. Any type of order or discipline creates polarization, which the children try to challenge. I do not want to go to sleep. I do not want porridge. I can do it myself. The tendency these children display for disobedience and naughtiness is not a result of nastiness so much as a natural desire to be free from external control. Sometimes it might seem that these children do things to annoy us on purpose, but in fact their behavior is unintentional and subconscious. Their provocative behavior is neither planned nor thought through. It is a natural form of expression. It is a manifestation of the action of balanced forces in response to the discipline adults try to force upon their children. The indigos' striving for independence is very evident in their attitude to religion. The new type of children may find it difficult to accept the contemporary church, write Lee Carroll and Jan Tober. Indigo children come into the world with a heightened sense of dignity, an unshakable faith that they are children of God. If this is the case, do they really need mediators to communicate with God? Hardly. Indigo children are governed mainly by the voice of the heart, then the mind. Adults think that they are doing well when they behave correctly. Children are of the opinion that the most important thing is to do everything with soul, with love, and not necessarily in the way that is considered correct. What if in some past life your current children were your parents, and now you have changed place? What if now these old souls have come to continue to teach you, giving you many wise lessons? The wisdom of the indigo children results from their heightened awareness. They are very aware of what is happening around them and who is who. Awareness is heightened when the focus of attention is directed inwards and not outwards. When a person is totally immersed in the cares imposed on them by the outside world, their mind dives into the game subconsciously. The indigo awareness counters the tendency of the sedated mind within the pendulum networks. All children are marked by strong individuality from birth. In their early childhood, they are very beautiful and charming. The secret to the child's charm is unity of heart and mind. They accept themselves the way they are, and so their essential inner beauty is not distorted by the false masks of the mind. Why is it then that as these wonderful creations mature, they show certain unpleasant traits and weak sides to their character? For these are the children of God, and so beautiful and powerful like God himself, despite the vulnerability of their early years. Initially, they are imbued with the power of the Creator, capable of creating a new reality. But the talents and abilities of the children of God do not have time to blossom and find practical realization before the pendulums deprive them of their divine power, unity of heart and mind. Children come into the world and look around them with large, trusting, shining, bead-like eyes. Life seems instantly full of promise and hope, but the world is ruled by pendulums according to the principle of divide and rule. Pendulums unify people's motivations and desires at the same time, destroying their uniqueness and the integrity of their individuality. The separation and alienation of the heart from the mind leads to the loss of divine beauty and strength. With time, small and big hopes are dashed. For some, this process takes place slowly and painlessly. In others who are less lucky, it happens quickly and harshly. If you look in the eyes of children at orphanages, you see two seemingly incompatible things: hope and despair. It is as if an unfinished question has gone cold in their eyes. Is this really how it is? The world of pendulums is always proving to children how imperfect and vulnerable they really are. At first, suspicion takes hold in their consciousness, and then fear that takes hold so firmly that it becomes habitual. You cannot run away just because you are frightened. You have to somehow survive in this aggressive environment. Finding themselves under the powerful influence of the structure, the children of God are forced to become elements of it. With age, children become wary of not being like everyone else because those who are, quote, like everyone else might, quote, get them, which is what often happens. It is safer in the crowd. If you stand apart from the crowd, you risk becoming an outcast. Gradually, children lose the gifts they have been given at birth: independence, awareness, intuition, and individuality. These qualities are most characteristic of the indigo children, but such characteristics mean certain death to the structure, and so the process of enslaving human will continues. Who will win this battle? No one can say. The only truly important thing is that until such a time as the structure has declared outright victory, we try here in this life to return, if just a small portion of the strength gifted to us by God. Transurfing can help us with this task. Could you, dear reader, be an indigo? It does not matter either way. We are all in essence the same, either grown-up children or the grown-ups' children. Energy lords. It is a strange thing, quite normal and yet strange at the same time. Cultural plants and pets were once wild and existed independently in a natural environment. But then man woke up and realized that he could establish control over them. It is the quality of conscious awareness that enabled man to rise above the plants and animals and exploit them for his own needs, while they continued to exist in a state of unconscious dreaming. Then structures had to be created that would determine where and how the enslaved species would live. Whatever goals the plants and animals have, and undoubtedly they do have them, the discipline and order of structure reduces them to nothing. From man's point of view, the life's purpose of his little brothers could be reduced to the primitive need for food and reproduction. However, if this is what the higher being really thinks, then it proves the truly primitive level of his supposedly perfect mind. In reality, every living creature has its own goal. But why? What for? The process of striving to fulfill purpose is the driver for evolution. We will return to this question later. For now, we will simply state the following fact. The true goal of any living being, whatever its nature, can only be achieved in its natural habitat. Any structure subjects the goals of its elements exclusively to its own interests. The development of tamed or disciplined plants follows the direction man chooses for them. As a result, the elements of the structure sleep even more deeply and finally, completely lose touch with their true goals. The life of wild animals and plants is a lot more intelligent and rich than we would otherwise think. Take, for example, a herd of wild deer. They have more than enough to deal with: the problem of defending themselves from predators, bringing up the offspring, foraging for food, dealing with family relationships, the group hierarchy, as well as simply enjoying life. The life of a herd of cows in the structure of a farm could hardly be more wretched. By providing them with food and shelter, man solved all sorts of problems for these animals, but in exchange they had to sacrifice to their master, who determines how, for what purpose, and how long they will live. It is similar to man selling his soul to the devil, is it not? So what of man? The reality is that in creating these structures, man becomes a slave himself. He loses himself and ceases to understand who he is and what he really wants. The range of his activities being finally reduced to the production, buying, and selling of various products. At the head of any structure, there is a superstructure pendulum, which has no interest in the products at all and focuses purely on activity developing the structure that produces them. Why is this? Energy is the prime product. People buy things for their pleasure and comfort, right? Aside from products that give us pleasure, other products exist that are designed to cause problems for others. In both cases, energy is radiated, positive or negative, because this is what the pendulums need. As you can see, it does not all stop at the production and trading of material objects. The greatest commodity is energy, and the energy market is of course controlled by pendulums. A small portion goes to the individual, but the larger piece of the cheese always goes to the pendulums. One person gets the hay, someone else gets the milk. There are even operations conducted on the energy market that mirror operations that take place in the financial market. For example, alcohol is pure energy. When you drink alcohol, you get energy on credit. Alcoholic-induced euphoria is like an energy advance, and the subsequent hangover is the return with interest. You always have to give back more than you borrowed. Pendulums never give away energy for free without profiting somehow from the transaction. Drinks with a low alcohol content make you feel relaxed. The pendulum sucks the energy in little bits. Stronger drinks, on the other hand, evoke a rush of energy. Let the vodka be drunk. Let the music flow. However, the pendulum lends the energy at high rates of interest. Soon enough, things tilt the other way. Let the vodka flow, get drunk on the music. After the euphoric high comes the lowest of lows. The more intense the excitement, the more tangible the depression that follows. The hangover comes not so much because of the physiological blow to the organs, so much as because while you are hungover, the pendulum desperately pumps out the person's free energy. The sufferer then has to either accept it and suffer, or take the hair of the dog. Then the pendulum can lend you energy again. The pendulum is in no rush. Sooner or later, it'll be paid off. If it were the barman, you could make a run for it out of the bar without paying, but you cannot run from a pendulum. The further a person gets into debt, the crueler the payback will be. In this condition, the free energy of the debtor is at the pendulum's full disposal. The person quite literally feels as if ticks had dug their claws into his energy body in the area of the heart chakra. The pendulum declares the ultimatum: either have something to drink or the torture will continue. Given that a person's will depends on their free energy, they become weak and lacking in will when that energy is taken from them. This is the main reason for alcoholism. When a person drinks, he is again credited energy with a portion of energy, but what inevitably follows is an even heavier payback. A person's heart can stop beating, as often is the case. The pendulum will leave a person in peace only when there is nothing more that can be taken from them, and whether they survive is a matter of luck. The first credit is always the most generous and joyful, like at a presentation. As you know, the first glass of wine you ever taste in your life has a very impressive effect. But with every glass after that, the sensation is not the same, and it is not just that the sensations become duller. They are all the more unpleasant. Pendulums fork out only with the objective of drawing people into their net. Payback is always carried out strictly without question of any concessions being made. So if you take a loan out of this kind, you must maintain a high level of awareness. Be realistic with regard to your overall creditworthiness. The drunks we see living on the street are not people who have fallen into moral degradation as we tend to think. These poor souls are people who are unable to calculate their resources properly and pay off their credit in time, and to this day remain in debt. They take out loan after loan, which becomes increasingly difficult to pay off, and it all started so well with holiday cheer. The process of the fall is not noticed in its initial stages, but then it gathers force and speed, creating an inevitable and irreversible snowball effect. The nature of an induced shift is quite treacherous, and anyone can be drawn towards the center of its vortex. In general, all intense energy-consuming experiences tend to be related to harmful habits, and these are the credits given out by the pendulums. Why are they harmful? Because pendulums are by their very nature aggressive and inclined to exacerbate the energy surrounding conflict. Everything that is tantalizing but bad for you ultimately ends badly. The greater the harm, the more negative energy is emitted. Positive energy is never emitted in such large quantities. The greatest yield is harvested from individuals who take drugs. The short-lived increased state of euphoria the substance gives the user is nothing compared to the depression that follows. And if the next dose does not kick in soon enough, the awful withdrawal experience will suck every last drop of the sorry user's energy. There are also other types of credit with lower interest rates, such as tobacco, coffee, tea, non-alcoholic drinks, and chewing gum. You may wonder what on earth chewing has to do with anything. As I've already said, when any need, material or spiritual, is fulfilled, energy is emitted. It could be the energy of pleasure, comfort, or something else. In any case, when you want something, you experience a buildup of energy. When you receive the thing you desire, you radiate that energy. In the process of chewing, a person experiences a certain feeling of comfort, which has very ancient roots. The nature of this feeling is quite evident. When you eat, everything is okay. When you are the one being eaten, things do not quite go so rosy. The same thing goes for any habit. Once you are a regular client, you become part of the herd. There is no need for a pin because while the client's attention is caught in the pendulum's noose, they are not going anywhere. When a person thinks about the object of their habit, they radiate energy at the pendulum's resonance frequency. All the debtor's thoughts are focused on receiving the next portion of energy, credit. They are not capable of thinking about anything else because the pendulum will not release their attention. This type of capture is possible due to a specific feature of the mind. Our attention can become fixated on one thing, and when this happens, it is like the arrow on a weather vane with the pendulum driving the wind in one and the same direction. The capture of the arrow of intention can be observed in the simple example of when you cannot get a particular song out of your head. You should not assume that a dependence develops solely due to physiological factors. These are part of it, but they do not play the key role. For example, when the most inveterate smokers set out on a submarine mission, the fact that they are unable to smoke does not distress them at all. Once the hatch is battened down and the command to dive has been given, any thought of being able to smoke vanishes completely because objectively speaking, there can be no opportunity to smoke. The smoker totally accepts the objective condition and does not even think about having a cigarette. It is as if the arrow of intention has switched and now is pointing in a different direction. So what of the physiological dependency? The submarine returns from its mission, and if the smoker has not decided to give up, they remember that they might just fancy a cigarette, and the insistent creditor catches the arrow of intention in its noose. The capture of the arrow of intention can also be observed in the phenomena of game or internet addiction, dependency. A huge number of people have become so addicted that they are only able to feel comfortable when they are sitting in front of a computer screen. Should someone who has succumbed to this kind of addiction actually tear themselves away from the screen for an hour or two, they will go into remission and begin to experience all the symptoms of withdrawal. They may experience headaches, muscle pains, and unbearable feeling of discomfort. Yet as soon as the client returns to the screen, the symptoms subside instantly. Obviously, in this case, there can be no question of physiological dependency. All dependency arises because of the arrow of intention has been caught in the pendulum's noose. In order to come off the needle, you have to switch your attention to something else. Willpower is rarely enough to free yourself from the noose in the same way that you can only get a song out of your head when you switch to a different tune. A harmful habit is as a rule accompanied by a specific script and set of scenery. Together, they create a characteristic scenario such as a smoke break at work, which facilitates the capture of your attention. There is only one way to pay off all your debts and walk away from the grievous bank. Change the script and scenery. It is not difficult to do, you just have to want to do it and then apply a little imagination. In any case, even if you do not have a credit debt, but use the products of civilization irrespective of your own will, give away a portion of your energy to the pendulums. People are literally herded, if not cultivated. The entire life of civilized society represents one continual process of consuming and giving away energy, and the entire exchange is controlled by pendulums. Of itself, the fact that human energy is harvested is not such a bad thing. The greatest peril the structure imposes is that it reduces the individual paths of its elements to nothing. The members of the structure forget the very notion that an individual path may exist for them. People not only carry out whatever the structure orders, they begin wanting the very things that are sole benefit to the structure. Do not delude yourself with the idea that man is a rational being and would never permit themselves to become enslaved in such a way. We have already shown that human awareness functions at a low level. The structure is slowly but surely causing the last remains of awareness to be reduced even further. In order to secure total victory, the structure must unite all its elements into a single informational field, and this process is already being facilitated rapidly and very successfully. Man may only have a few bricks left before he finally walls himself in completely. What can be done? It turns out that if you consume the products of civilization, you are being shepherded. There have been occasions where people have tried to escape civilization and settle in communities somewhere in the wilds of nature. It is not for me to judge how successful they were. Even so, contemporary man is no longer capable of separating themselves from civilization entirely. They can no longer adapt to that extent. It does make sense, however, to reduce the harmful products you use to a minimum and replace them with the natural gifts of nature. For example, you can set up an area of family-owned land with a garden and vegetable plot. The greatest advantage of having an oasis of nature in the desert of civilization is that the norms and standards there are established by the owner and not the structure. And you do not have to start digging the ground if it is not your thing. Everyone should have the opportunity to establish rules of everyday life independently. If you want to cover everything in concrete, you can. And if you want to keep the garden wild in all its diversity, that is up to you too. Another approach for someone living in the city may be shifting to a diet of exclusively organic and natural foods. But first you would have to wake up and become aware of the fact that a beautiful apple cultivated within the structure and bought in a supermarket will only be suitable in quality for a fully fledged element of the structure with a corresponding set of illnesses that result from living off this kind of food. There are many different paths and ways of living, but each individual must choose the one which is right for them. A role model for me will always be one particular feral cat with whom I had the honor to be acquainted. My friend and I loved to escape to the forest and have a delicious campfire to get a break from the benefits of civilization. On one occasion, a huge cat approached our little camp, attracted by the interesting smells we were making. The cat had clearly once been someone's pet, but for some reason had ended up in the forest and turned wild again. Judging by his size, the ragged animal was very successfully hunting birds and mice and could probably have taken down a hare. The cat did not refuse our offering of tidbits, but neither did he stand around on tiptoe. He grabbed it and ran. After that meeting, we had the pleasure of seeing the cat again on quite a few of our trips to the forest. The whiskered fellow loved to help himself to our offerings, but he would not allow either of us to get too close. The cat was a true transurfer. He had learned the taste of true freedom, and although he sometimes dipped into civilization, he would never have exchanged his independence, not for any creature comforts. There is nothing wrong with making the most of the benefits of civilization, as long as you do not become addicted or dependent. You can tell a free individual from the herd because of their awareness. All you have to do is wake up and become aware of what is really happening. I have learned these things and am sharing them with you now for the simple reason that, well, actually it is a secret. But I will share it with you, dear reader. I have returned to the wild. I have run away from the farm. Declaration of intention. Until now, we have only focused on how to free yourself from pendulums and escape their influence. But is it possible to benefit in some way from a pendulum? Any dream is essentially brought about with the help of pendulums. There is no getting away from the fact that we all live and work in some structure or another. It is simply a question of whether the structure deprives you of your dreams or helps you to realize them. Are there methods by which one can impact a pendulum directly? This is unlikely. You cannot tame a pendulum, let alone control it. However, it is possible to use the qualities of a pendulum to your own interests. Have you ever wondered why people make toast when they are having a meal with friends? Does this tradition have a practical purpose, or is it simply symbolic ritual? It turns out that toasts are not just spoken for the sake of it. At times, folk wisdom produces customs that appear to be no more than meaningless superstition. People follow these established rules without suspecting that they actually represent a kind of method for shaping reality. The thing is that alcoholic drinks, as we described above, represent a kind of energy credit. Free energy receives an additional source of support and is raised one rung higher. Given that this is really the energy of one's will, the result it brings will depend on where you direct it. For example, if you drink to drown your sorrow, reality will descend into an even darker hole. When people drink from happiness, they will find even more reasons to make merry. If drinking is mixed with a feeling of anxiety and fear, life will give you something worth fearing. The same principle works in each case. Thought energy strengthened with a spark of energy shifts the individual onto a lifeline of a corresponding quality. When a pendulum gives credit, it serves to strengthen the energy of intention. No matter how hard it sways, the pendulum itself has no access to outer intention, and so it is incapable of materializing a sector of the alternative space. Yet reality can be controlled by living beings, so when a person makes a toast, they focus the direction of their intention. Do you see what is happening when they do this? The qualities of the energy belonging to the pendulum creditor are as a rule quite negative. However, when a person attributes goodwill to this energy, they change its polarity. Hence, a toast is not just an empty ritual, it is a declaration of intention. However, despite the beneficial action of toasts, they are all inherently contain the same unfortunate mistake. The good wishes are usually expressed for the future. Because of this, the energy made available by the pendulum is only transformed into positive energy. It does not have any impact on reality. The desire expressed in the toast remains out there somewhere as an unattainable promise of something better. This is quite natural. After all, the mirror is not capable of producing the future. It only ever reflects the present. So what can we conclude from this? All toasts should be uttered in the present tense. They might sound a little weird as a result, but they will be effective. For example, instead of saying we will be, say we are, or we have good health. We won. Those who are not with us are always with us. Lucky are those at sea. Our wishes come true. Good fortune is always with us, etc. This type of declaration of intention will immediately start pulling your wishes into the reality of today rather than putting them off until a tomorrow that never comes. Do not assume that you can easily turn your desires into reality with the help of alcohol. As you know, this is a double-edged sword. The larger the credit, the higher the rate of interest, to say nothing of the fact that as the credit debt increases consciousness, which means a person's intention shifts into an area of the alternative space that does not correspond to reality, and there can be no question of carrying out such manipulations with the help of drugs. It is not always possible to transform a pendulum's negative energy into positive energy, and not everyone is capable of doing so. Black magic works in accordance with the same principle. An evil magician calls on dark powers in order to exploit their energy and strengthen their hostile intention. It is never lucrative in any respect to get credit from a pendulum. However, if you do end up doing so, it is essential that you stick to the following rule. When you are dangling on a pendulum's hook, think only of the positive. You can even take the example of the transurfing pendulum. It will not harm you, and the declaration of intention may significantly increase its efficacy. Every time you come across any information related to transurfing, remind yourself that it can assist you in the realization of your goals. Attuning your attention in this way will position the vector of the alternatives flow in the right direction. You should take the same approach with regard to any other pendulum, even if it bears no relation to your life. For example, while you are watching a television series or show, in one way or another, you are exchanging energy with a pendulum. While observing the action, keep your target slide ready, i.e. the picture of what you want to receive. You will always be able to spot some kind of connection with your goal in the flow of information, however small. For example, when the heroes of the series set off in a fabulously flashy car, express the fact that you intend to buy something similar for yourself. Never ever think of anything negative in the moment that you receive a credit. Worrying thoughts, pressing problems, despair, fear, all these emotions will be amplified by the boost of energy you are receiving. Here are some examples. When you are having a smoke break, think about your forthcoming success as if it were already a done deal. Or an advert encourages you to sit and enjoy the aroma of a nice cup of coffee. It would be nice in this moment to enjoy the good fortune you already have, whatever happens in the future. Do you recall the principle of coordination? For example, in the moment that you're having a smoke or drinking coffee, instead of letting your thoughts go to run their own lazy course, declare your intention. Everything is going wonderfully because I shape my reality with intention. I know how it is done. Tea ceremonies are organized according to the same principle. Saying a prayer before the onset of a meal and dedicating the food to God has become custom among many different people. However, once you have acknowledged God, do not forget about yourself. If you make offerings to yourself with the same love and care, saying something like, "Eat, eat, my dear one, get well," the effect will be completely unexpected and unbelievable. It is even possible that certain illnesses will disappear. Your body will be surprised at first and will be then glad and blossom like a flower that has been tenderly cared for. The most important thing is to serve yourself with sincerity, love, and words like, "If you do not feed yourself, no one else is going to do it for you." This type of declaration carries enormous power. If you previously treated yourself with indifference or even aversion, then similar rituals will bring about amazing change. Do not just take it from me, try it. Judging from the above, it might seem that the declaration of intention can be used in the games of cunning pendulums like the stock market, casino, or betting on the races. In principle, why not? The chances of success will be increased if in the moment of placing your money and likewise during the game you visualize a slide of inevitable winnings. It is not easy to do, but it is possible. As a rule, the player's thoughts run along the lines of, "If only I could win. What if I lose? But no, I have to win. This time I will be lucky." This is no good, for in these thoughts there is everything from desire, considering how to win, and fear of losing to hopes of success. You have to put all thoughts and emotions, including hope for success, to one side. You must eliminate all this until all you have left is the unconditional and dispassionate will to win. Your declaration should be, "I am a winner," and your declaration should sound without need for explanation, conditions, or exclamation marks. If you manage to achieve this state of dispassionate and unconditional will, you will have your chances of success rapidly increase. Yet that is not all. Over the course of a single game session, you may be successful once, twice, or even 3 times. But winning cannot go on forever because everyone is human and no one can keep importance to a minimum level forever. Any form of gambling is basically a type of energy credit which is capable of imperceptibly transforming into an induced transition with a tragic finale. These issues are covered in detail in the first part of the Transurfing materials, so we will not go into them again. You could say that there is only one way of avoiding having to pay interest on credit. Know when to leave the game. Do not just leave the game, but free yourself entirely from the slightest connection with the pendulum and extinguish any thoughts that resonate at the pendulum's frequency. In other words, for a certain period of time, you have to switch your attention to something else so that the game does not enter your head for a moment. This is the only way you can save yourself from being drawn into the vortex of the induced transition. Stop swaying with the pendulum. Once the tie has been totally cut, you can begin a new game session. It should be said, though, that playing with a pendulum is a dangerous and unpredictable adventure, because not one individual can possibly be endowed with a superhuman, dispassionate will to have. Essentially, it is not a game. It is a dance with a shadow. A pendulum is an invisible, cold, merciless shadow. It is not endowed with conscious awareness, nor does it have the power of intention. It does not have a heart or a mind, the opposite of which generates feelings, impulses, and weaknesses. You can never get the better of a pendulum, just as you can never outrun your own shadow. The pendulum observes your movements, knowing you have no escape. The shadow can never be defeated, and playing with it is meaningless. So what can you do? Either abandon the dangerous game or create your own venture and become a pendulum's favorite. Now that would be meaningful. In trying to beat a pendulum, you are just chasing your own shadow. Any effort you make to win and all the emotional concerns that go with those aspirations are the subject of inner intention, and inner intention always leads blindly to what is right in front of your nose, failing to see anything else at all. To put an end to the mindless chasing, you have to stop, look around you, and begin moving in your own direction independently. Then the roles are swapped. The pendulum will have to keep up with the individual rather than the individual struggling to keep up with the pendulum. Anyone who abandons narrow inner intention becomes the master of the game, the producer in the dances with shadows. In order to initiate your own game, you have to be yourself. Your personal game is the shaping of your own reality at your own discretion. You can do it. You just have to claim the privilege. Only you can give away or deprive yourself of your own privileges. This has to be understood. However, it does not all come down to giving yourself permission to be the producer. Stars are born, but they are lit up by pendulums. You could be as wise as King Solomon himself or create a stunning masterpiece, but no one will ever learn of it unless a powerful pendulum sweeps you up. However incredible your masterpiece is, this is the only reason it will not have been successful. In culture, science, and art, outstanding creations only become an object of great interest if a new pendulum emerges, or it is for some reason beneficial to an existing pendulum. In order to become a star in your field, you have to know how to exploit the features of a pendulum. Have you never wondered why certain works that were immensely successful at some point in the past lose their popularity, despite the fact that they retain their unique features? There are a vast number of cultural achievements whose amazing qualities would more than fulfill any contemporary standards. And yet today there is no market for these achievements because their pendulums that shone in the past have faded or been extinguished. When it comes down to it, popularity and fashion are always created by pendulums. Why else would people simultaneously desire the same item in mass? You can see the same phenomenon of fashion in the example of the two massively popular groups, the Beatles and ABBA. Both groups achieved worldwide recognition not because they created something fundamentally new or particularly outstanding. Nothing they did was totally new. On the contrary, the musical genres of disco and rock were created by other musicians, much less well known. So how do you explain the phenomenal success of these two groups in particular? The Beatles' career began with a run of mishaps and failures. Initially, the quartet represented a fairly ordinary band not unlike many others at the time. They were not even particularly skilled musically. The level of their professionalism never went beyond local pubs where they did in fact perform. Yes, the Beatles were talented, but that is not enough to make it in show business. The old pendulums will always try their best to keep the new up-and-coming at bay. By 1962, the group had carved out its own style and would soon produce the songs that rocked the entire world. But that was only later. Although the group had few loyal fans at this time, no one really had noticed the Beatles. That year, the band unsuccessfully hammered on the doors of various recording studios, but were everywhere flatly turned down. It was beginning to look as if the group had no chance of ever reaching any higher than club level. In the authorized biography of the Beatles, Hunter Davies writes, "And yet we still believed that we would make it and become number one," said George. "When things were really bad and there were no opportunities at all for us, we used to do a kind of special ritual. John would shout, 'Where are we headed, boys?' We would yell back, 'Upwards, Johnny, to the very top.' 'To the top of what?' he would ask. 'To the top of the very top, Johnny.' Yet it was not their determination that secured their ticket to success. In 1963, they managed to finally release their first record, a single. Unexpectedly, the song made number one in the charts. This was their first significant achievement, and yet no one considered the event to be any big thing. The press presented the single as a moment of success for a short-lived star and missed the soon-to-be sensation. The success of the first single was followed by another period of quiet anonymity, which turned out to be the calm before the storm. 6 months later, Beatlemania was taking England by storm, and soon afterwards it was spread throughout the entire world. Every country in the world, writes Hunter Davies, witnessed the mass psychosis that just a short time ago had been unimaginable and which is unlikely ever to be repeated. Today, no one believes in this kind of thing anymore, and yet just yesterday, it was all real. A similar phenomenon was repeated in the ABBA story. In 1972, this brilliant quartet failed to qualify in the semifinals in order to perform at the Eurovision Song Contest. Finally, in 1974, they managed to get through the competition and unexpectedly for everyone secured a stunning victory, leaving the other contestants way behind. At that time, no one expected anything more of the group. Everyone thought that a band labeled Eurovision winners could only be a short-term wonder and would never make more than one hit. After winning the contest, everything went quiet again, just as it did with the Beatles. Hardly a year had passed before the world was gripped by another powerful wave, this time, ABBA-mania. Two clear patterns can be traced in both stories. Firstly, popularity develops in a wave-like trajectory. Initially, there is a fairly lengthy period of anonymity during which a small but stable fan base is formed. Then a moment of sudden flight follows, after which there is another period of quiet, as if the wave has pulled back from the shoreline to gain power. Finally, after a period of relative inactivity comes a sudden and powerful wave of astounding success. Popularity remains high for a certain period of time, but with time, the wave inevitably fades as new pendulums emerge and squeeze the previous pendulums out of the spotlight and into the background. The most interesting pattern in these stories consists in the fact that the works that become huge hits are not acknowledged during the initial period of anonymity. People listen to the songs but do not draw any attention. And then there is a sudden movement when the songs begin to create a different, unusual impression on people of something innovative and original. The sound acquires a hint of something very stylish and fashionable, and for some inexplicable reason, everyone simultaneously agrees that it is brilliant. So where does this common sense of novelty and style come from for the Beatles, whose sound was already characteristically the Beatles back in 1962? Why did it not capture anyone's imagination then? Why was no one mad about ABBA in 1972? They were singing the same songs then, so what happened? Why did people suddenly find them so electric in 1975? This phenomenon can be explained by the fact that every epoch has a characteristic quality, sound or hue, in other words, its own charisma. However, a new epoch is not just initiated of its own accord. It is drawn into being by the intention of the people, like a cloud in the alternative space. Then the pendulum stabilizes the collective intention. At first, a small group of fans form. Each fan radiates thought energy to the tune of, "I like that." A pendulum is then created which unites and synchronizes the thoughts of the admirers into, "We like that." In the alternative space, whereas we know everything exists, there is an area of sectors with one quality in common. Everyone likes that. The collective intention of the first group of fans drives the movement of material realization towards this area. As a result, after a certain time, reality takes on the hue of the new era. The number of fans continues to increase and the pendulum acquires strength. Eventually, collective intention reaches and exceeds critical mass, and the cloud with the charisma of the new era encompasses material reality in its entirety. This cloud drawn towards the united intention of the pendulum's adherents creates the charisma specific to the new time. Now you know how new trends are born, you can boldly make the most of your lawful privilege to be yourself without looking back at the rest of the world. This is the only way to realize the opportunity to communicate to the world your unique individuality. Pendulums will not put up with unique individuals. They will be forced to make you a star. Stop chasing your shadow and set out on your path independently. Then the pendulums will have no other choice than to follow you. You are quite capable of becoming a trendsetter by virtue of the fact that the qualities of your soul are totally unique. A luxury individual cloud has already been prepared in the alternative space and awaits your arrival. Announce your declaration of intention. Summary. The life goal and purpose of all living beings is to shape reality. Boredom as such does not exist. Boredom is simply a constant and insatiable thirst to shape reality. Appraisals based on a comparison generate polarization. Balanced forces eliminate polarization by means of clashing opposites. An object or quality which is attributed special significance attracts objects with the opposite qualities. The pendulum rule is, do as I do. The transurfing rule is, give yourself permission to be yourself and allow others to do the same. The transurfing rule eliminates polarization. Awareness, in this moment I am awake and am clearly aware of what I am doing. Why, and why in this manner specifically. The first law of the pendulum, it tries to exacerbate the energy of conflict. The second law of the pendulum, it does everything possible to stabilize the structure. Pendulums coordinate the existence of organized structures. The enslavement of will, the structure teaches people what they should want. In order to free yourself from the zombifying effect of the structure, you must adopt the role of the participating spectator. The process of achieving the goal is what drives evolution. The individual loses themselves in the structure, ceasing to understand who they are and what they really want. Dependence arises due to the fact that the arrow of intention falls into the pendulum's noose. To come off the needle, you have to switch your attention and occupy your mind with something else, changing the scripts and scenery. The charisma of a particular epoch is drawn in by the intention of a group of people. Like a cloud from the alternative space. Whenever you receive any energy credit, announce your declaration of intention. It is impossible to beat a pendulum. You have to either abandon the dangerous game altogether or create your own adventure and become one of its favorites. In order to create your own game, you have to give yourself permission to be yourself.